You're looking good, and it feels good to be with you today. Hello, I'm Kendall Brian Hunter. I'm dressed a little down, and I've had a hard day today, so I'm working this at the tail end of the day instead of early in the morning. But I am Kendall Brian Hunter, and this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point. I'm author of this book, Consider My Servant Job. I did in the promo the cover screen. It's a book I wrote about Job, so you can get a head start on the Old Testament for next year. And this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point. And first of all, by the way, did you catch the op-ed that President Nelson wrote for Time Magazine? It's on the Church app and talks about human kindness and human dignity, some of the things he's been talking about. Now, anyone who's 100 years or older, I don't care who it is, the Pope, a president, your next door neighbor, if they're over 100 years, just talk to them. They got some interesting stuff to say. There's a saying, the collective knowledge and wisdom of seasoned citizens is the most valuable yet untapped resource our young people have. The collective knowledge and wisdom of seasoned citizens is the most valuable yet untapped resource our young people have. Take that in your mind when you read what President Nelson has to say. Like, probably with the exception of Putin, anyone over 100 is worth listening to. But today's theme is trials, heroes, and revelation, and we're going to actually throw in the just war theory. So point one is section 98 and 100, and it's or 101. So it's given the context of Missouri persecutions. We got commandments to go there, and it did not turn out well. And this is some of the things. Sometimes we want to put a smiley face on it. This is one of these discussions about history and finding faith in history. The Lord makes it clear that a lot of it had to do with the saints. There were mobs going on. There's no excusing human rights violations, burning houses, violating women. There's no excuse for that. But son of a gun, members of the church do bear some of the blame. Why do I say that? Let me quote the section 101. I, the Lord, so this is the Lord, Jehovah speaking, Jesus Christ, I, the Lord, have suffered the affliction to come upon them, wherewith they have been afflicted in consequence of their transgressions. Now, you get it? You're disobedient. Bad stuff happens to you. Well, I don't believe in a God who punishes people. That's why the Book of Mormon talks about imaginary gods. You don't want to believe a God who punishes people because you want God to be your enabler. You want God to be your dealer. You want God to give you a pass, give you a pat on the head, and go your own way. It's a control issue. But yeah, in consequence of the transgressions, behold, I send you. There were jarrings and contentions and envyings and strifes and lustful and covetous desires among them. Therefore these things they polluted their inheritances. Now you notice it's what's going on. Next verse says, they're slow to hearken unto the voice of the Lord their God, and therefore the Lord their God is slow to hearken unto their prayers, to answer them in the day of trouble. Prayer, this is a little bit like with the brother of Jared. Got chastised for 3 hours for not praying. How's your prayer life going? Are you such a cell phone addict that you can't pray? Are you so overscheduled? Are you a workaholic that you don't have time to pray? That you don't have time to study the scriptures? There were jarrings, contentions, envyings, and strifes. Does that describe your ward, your quorum in Sunday schools? You have the people who make the speech makers and try and control all the comments. What's going on that you don't know about? I've been surprised by people. During my life, we've had 270 excommunicated. George P. Lee, a 70, then James Hamula, more recently. And we had one who was Paul H. Dunn. Paul H. Dunn was actually the first general authority I ever met. He had dedicated our chapel, and he had to make a confession that one, he exaggerated some of his stories. He wasn't always truthful in the stories that he told, and that he's also doing some other stuff. It was unspecified. You can go to his Wikipedia page. That has an accurate quote from the Church News. You can double check it off the church's website in case you're curious how accurate it was. But yeah, I've been surprised by people. Study the life of Ravi Zacharias. That was a letdown. So you just don't know what's going on. It's, recently, the church had David Archuleta and Lindsey Sterling do face-to-faces, and the idea of getting celebrity endorsement for the gospel. Think about that, celebrity endorsement for the gospel. And both of them, to various degrees, have turned away from the church. Lindsey Sterling is now on Instagram drinking coffee for the least of the saints, as you read this section. That's the bottom line for sainthood. Why someone needs physical stimulation like that. She has an exciting life, and why does she need a caffeine jolt? Well, the praise of the world and the flattery of men, physical appetites. Both of these people, David Archuleta and Lindsey Sterling, can always come back, and we should embrace them with open arms and love them on a human level, but understand what they're doing is fraught with consequences, that there will be an accounting. But the Lord's always out there with outstretched arms for both of them. Now in section 101, it has a very interesting parable. And it's the parable of a variation of the parable of the Watchmen. The Watchman commanded to plant 12 olive trees, tells his people, the servants, to plant 12 olive trees, build a hedge, and build a tower for the watchmen. Now the servants did all this except building the tower, which is symbolic of building the temple. And what happens is they didn't have the watchtower up, they didn't have their defenses, a bit like the parable of the foolish virgins. This were not alert and attentive to what's going on. See the camouflage? There was a spiritual war going on. Wearing the green. It's not quite olive drab, but my last name is Hunter, so maybe this worked out for the best. We are at war, and there are people violently trying to destroy us. And so what happens is it gets overrun. And then what the Lord says is, we told you to do this, you ignored me, bad stuff happened. You should have enough sense to carry along some backup oil, because these wedding things sometimes run late. You're not using common sense. The parable of the talents. Why don't you give the money to the exchangers? Why didn't you put it in the bank? At least put it in crypto, so you're getting some interest or doing something with it instead of just leaving it there. Underneath, right next to a hole in the ground next to the mulberry tree. And they were overrun. And you think about the temples neglecting it. It's for some reason saints, and we do need to bring the local leadership into condemnation with this. Stuff just bounces off. People, leaders and saints have their own agendas, and the Lord says, okay, I want you to do things. We just ignore it. For us, what's the lesson for us when we sort of half do or do about 20% or 30% of what the Lord wants us to do, but we ignore the rest? How's hope-centered church going? You taking it seriously or just kind of falling into a rut? I remember when I was living in a student ward, one of the bishops, and he was very tearful and pleading about this. He said, we got married, and he just always found excuses not to do a family home evening. By the time his children were teenagers, it was almost too late. It's never really too late unless you become a son of perdition. But we do talk about perdition on this podcast. But you really see, you just kept putting stuff off, and you see the bad consequences. Like, okay, why can't you think ahead? Why can't you think abstractly into the future? Project this in the future, that this is going to be a bad thing. What's all that caffeine doing to the capillaries in your eyes and your kidneys when you're drinking your mocha or your Starbucks or your sports drinks every day? What's the caffeine doing to those capillaries? Can you think ahead? We'd like to tweak and didlefritz with the church programs. President Monson spoke about unauthorized practices. President Hinckley used this one word, aberrations. That's a good word to keep in mind. This is an aberration. We're sort of tweaking things around, not quite following directions. Back in 1999, October 1999, Dallin H. Oaks gave a talk on church teachings. Then this is when he was a little bit younger and sprier, and he had just show up to some church meetings, and And the third hour, the priest stood in Relief Society, just sit in and watch what was going on. That'd be kind of fun. But he said, what's going on? He's showing up there, and they had this was back in the day of the manuals. Oh, I can't do it. I'll do it. Back when you had the Joseph Smith, the teachings of the Presidents of the Church manuals, and people were sort of doing it, and then they just talked about whatever. That happened numerous times in the wards I attended as different teachers. It just wasn't one person. Several teachers would just kind of ignore it, and they talk about whatever they wanted to talk about. And I remember one time we had a new person in the quorum, and it was a jolt for me because I kind of got used to it. And sometimes, being the squeaky wheel gets thrown in the trash. Sometimes the squeaky wheel doesn't get the oil; it gets thrown in the trash. Okay, can you just shut up, stop criticizing stuff? But he pointed out, as the teacher was talking about William James, said, "Okay, look, are we going to talk about the manual?" And the teacher kind of sputtered and just went on with what he was doing. And the church leadership just ignored it and let it go on. Studying the ark. Building a golden calf. We're going to talk about in section 124, golden calf, studying the ark. When the church says, okay, we want you to do things this way, and we can do it. For example, we're getting near the end of the year. It's the end of the fiscal year, and we're going to be doing tithing settlements shortly. Now, at the end of the year, any unspent funds get sent back to the stake. So bishops, that doesn't mean you transfer unspent funds and you put it in the ward mission fund with the intent to hide it from the stake, to hold on to this money. That means you let go of it, you exercise faith, and you be obedient, and you send that money to the stake, and you don't ask the clerks to violate their conscience and violate church policy because you're greedy and you want to keep the money to yourself. What about not dividing the units? When it gets too big, what about not dividing the quorums? You overloading these elders quorums presidents, and you're not solving a problem because you don't want to have these divisions in the ward, and so you choose insanity over community. Your form of community is insanity because you're not dividing the quorum. How about this? Adding things to the gospel. I don't know if this is true or not. I just saw this on the internet, so I'm presenting this as something I saw on the internet, not as fact. In one ward, apparently, they'd have the young woman bake bread. It was this bread that they baked was used for the sacrament. Is that creating some unnecessary and extra work? Was it giving the appearance that in order to be inclusive with young women in sacrament, is that actually the appropriate way of doing that? Or are you just adding stuff to the gospel? Another thing, too, is, like I said, I'm presenting this as something I saw on the internet. If you don't have a filter, you don't have that little filter said, I saw something on the internet said this just might not be true. Another ward is they'd have a young woman take the sacrament trays and pass it to the woman in the mother's rooms for breastfeeding mothers. Is that a good or bad thing? I mean, you do have better when you're sitting there, you're passing it to various people. You have the I talked about this earlier on in another lesson about how in the olden days they wouldn't allow deacons or teachers to pass the sacrament. It's only priests, because it says the priests administer the sacrament, and I'm not sure where that shifted. But you're saying the mothers can't cover themselves, and when the deacon, teacher, or priest or whomever goes into the mother's room to pass it, it's a bit like with the hospital. Is you understand in a hospital setting, different sexed, male patient. I'll tell about this real thing. I had a hernia, but my primary care was female, so she had to check the it was the inguinal hernia. It's the groin hernia. Now they have medical chaperones, but you understand in certain settings it's okay to do stuff like that, like a medical thing, but also in a church setting, passing the sacrament. That can lead to wrong appearances, and it's a problem. What are you tweaking with the church? What are this cold-blooded and red-handed disobedience with hoarding money from God? The afflictions that come to you when you do this. The afflictions. Therefore, he giveth this promise unto you with an immutable covenant, that they shall be fulfilled, and all the things wherein you have been afflicted shall work together for your good and to my name's glory, saith the Lord. That's section 98.3. An immutable covenant that the Lord's promises are going to be fulfilled. Yeah, he could swear by nothing higher, as it says in Hebrew. He swears by himself because there's nothing higher. That these things these trials you're going through will be for your good. That's the same thing Joseph Smith was told in Liberty Jail, section 121, 122. You cast into the jaws of hell and give the experience to be for thy good. This Missouri experience has also been for our good, for the saints that happened to, and as we study it later on in history, are you really learning these lessons about disobedience and jarrings and envyings, trying to hijack the church and wrap it around your ego? God's hand is always outstretched. Keep in mind, too, is not all saints are equally culpable. It's the 80-20 Pareto's principle. It's that 20% of the people cause 80% of the problems. I was an executive secretary, and that small 20% of the crazy makers that are doing stuff. Now, in Section 98, let's shift gears a bit. We talk about a just war. We have Leo Tolstoy influenced Gandhi, influenced Martin Luther King, influenced Nelson Mandela. And I think that's the award President Nelson won, about pacifism. But is there such thing as a Christian just war? Think Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was executed because he involved with the plot to kill Adolf Hitler. He's a pastor. And then you have Joan of Arc. And it's not just the Crusades. Okay, was Joan of Arc doing something immoral? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, when Joseph Smith was a lieutenant general in the Nauvoo Legion, a military force, the National Guard, the militia, was that immoral? Nephi beheading Laban, and then Captain Moroni. He wasn't poking people with sticks. He was stabbing them and scalping them. So here's the just war, section 98, 23 through 48, and I reviewed this after 9/11, all those years ago, just to make sure I square about what was going on. 93, 23 through 48. It's a reiteration of an ancient law, and summed up, it says the law of three witnesses. You bear it patiently for 3 times, and you act on the 4th, but you're always extending mercy. There's also more stuff to it as you pay attention to how Captain Moroni did things. Arming, weakness invites danger. Having a good defense to prevent people, so you just wrap knuckles a couple of times instead of having to drop atomic bombs on people. Especially too when we're translating it, you should be paying attention to what's been going on with the Russian-Ukrainian war, the Russo-Ukrainian war, with how it shifted to a drone war, in the same way that World War II in the Pacific was really a carrier war. It wasn't battleships blowing each other up, it was planes shooting at each other. I think it was the Coral Sea, the ships were never inside of each other, and it's the same thing, we're shifting to a drone war now. What's that mean for doomsday, the apocalypse? We renounce war, even small-scale conflagrations among friends, families, and communities, where I was extending mercy. Harold B. Lee, I put a link to that where he talks about that. This is Teach the Gospel of Salvation. President Nelson gave a talk on being peacemakers, and it's funny because it got picked up on the news that he's saying that the church is criticizing the war in Iraq. It's like, well, no, he wouldn't say that. He was just talking in general principles. Plus, Elder Nelson isn't spoken. Gordon B. Hinckley was, and Gordon B. Hinckley made that clear in the October 2001 conference about 9/11, what was going on, what is and isn't appropriate. Then you have about the petition. It's that the saint should petition the government for redress. And that's First Amendment right in America, Bill of Rights, written Constitution. And it's with this, we're going to talk a little bit about the Constitution. It's interesting because in teaches, first of all, you think about the parable of the unjust judge, where you keep wearing the person down. Now, there's a bad way to do this with Martin Harris and the 116 pages. That's the wrong way of doing it, but it was a legitimate principle. Keep asking, eventually you'll get what you want. Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith, page 35. Wherefore this is my counsel, that you retain your lands even unto the uttermost, and employ every lawful means to seek a redress of your enemies, and pray to God day and night to return you in peace and in safety to the lands of your inheritance. And when the judge shall fail you, appeal unto the executive. And when the executive fail you, appeal unto the president. And when the president fail you, this is a prophecy, when the president fail you, and all the laws fail you, and the humanity of the people fail you, and all things else fail you, but God alone, and you continue to weary him with your importunings, as the poor woman did the unjust judge, he will not fail to execute judgment upon your enemies, and to avenge his own elect, and cry unto him night and day. Now keep in mind, you always love your neighbors, but if they're being aggressors, it's like we talked about in section 109, dedication of the, or we're going to talk about in section 109, the curtain temple. Sorry, my mind got a little bit out of order. How it talks about praying for the enemies, praying for the enemies of the church. There's a little bit nuance there. So this leads us into constitutional laws, and there are certain things that are just hardwired non-negotiables. American exceptionalism and an inspired constitution. It's in the scriptures about the vision of Columbus, or Pedro Alvarez Cabral, depending upon where you're from. But so these are just non-negotiables. You can't excuse them away, regardless of what your political party teaches or your personal convictions. You always put God's law first, but we have good laws will not conflict with God's laws. Now, the Constitution, that's, of course, the Constitution as amended, it was given for the benefit of the whole world. Dallin H. Oaks, April 2021, talked about it, called Defending Our Divinely Inspired Constitution. Give that a replay. It's under assault. You have popular attitudes, judicial activisms. Now, I have been reading up on the Commerce Clause, and at a certain point, the Supreme Court decided to ignore the 10th Amendment, and everything was just Commerce Clause. Now, the 10th Amendment, that's one of these firewalls in there, and the Supreme Court just incinerated it. By not taking the 10th Amendment, that's where you have the reserved powers to the states and to the people. Like I said, you have the popular attitudes, judicial activisms. How you change the Constitution is by amendment, or you ignore it. Supreme Court rulings have certain logical tests, or I'm not sure what you'd call it, certain moods, a thought process, a train of thought that gets ingrained in the Constitution, slowly changes over time. We need saints, scholars, historians, political scientists, and lawyers, and politicians and statesmen to get the Constitution back in place. And we're going to talk about, is the Constitution a slave document? Is it? Are you using a Marxist interpretation on it? It's about just white people maintaining power. Wise men should be sought. The solution to this is the character of elected officials. And well, what do you do if one's a crook and the other's a schnook? Well, candidate A is a crook, candidate B is a schnook. It's a gift of the Spirit. Wisdom, and a political candidate's a gift of the Spirit, but also the wisdom to make a right choice in an election. And recently the president of the church, I think it was 2 years ago, talked about that voting a straight party ticket is undemocratic. So I took that to heart. And I just sat down there with my ballot. It was a mail-in ballot, and I just said, okay, if I get done with this and I haven't voted for one person from another party, I have failed. And third, I think I voted for 3 people of different parties. So I voted for my political party, but I have voted for people of other parties. I remember I just finished reading a book by a man who boasted that he never voted for a person from another party. I can see good in other parties, and sometimes the person in the other candidates, the other person in the other party is a better candidate. So that's enough for things right now with the persecutions, the Constitution, and just war. So that's point 2, Section 99, John Murdoch. Now, John Murdoch is one person I just love to meet. Him along with Lyman Sherman. Study John Murdoch's life. This is a guy who just burnt himself up in service to the church. Read his the bare bones summary on Joseph Smith Papers, and go to Wikipedia, read about his life. The other one is Lyman Sherman. Lyman Sherman was called to be an apostle, but Heber C. Kimball didn't ordain him. And I can't remember if he has a section of the Doctrine and Covenants. I can't remember if I've talked about it or if I'm going to talk about it. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. So, John Murdoch was the father of the twins adopted by Joseph Smith and Emma. And he got called on this mission, so he needed to make arrangements for his children. It's funny, the section says, it's an interesting section, get rejected, and it's told after a few years. Now, this is back when people were called on missions forever, just indefinite. After a few years, you come back, get your inheritance. That's interesting, too. We talk about being called of prophecy. That's one of our articles of faith. We don't talk about the doctrine of releases. Is release a punishment? I remember we had remember the Quorum of the 12 Apostles come to our stake, and in the process, one of the counselors of the stake presidency was released. Another one was called. And of course, they had to quell the rumors that this was a punishment. Well, now it's just people get released all the time. You sometimes just don't get released at the same time. So we talk about callings, but, are releases inspired, or these releases retaliation? Well, study that. Think about that. Point 3, Section 100, Speaking with Inspiration. Joseph Smith was a revelator, and Sidney Rigdon was a spokesman. Same thing with Oliver Cowdery, because Oliver Cowdery and Sidney Rigdon were better speakers than Joseph Smith, but eventually Joseph Smith developed. Lorenzo Snow made that observation. Joseph Smith was a bit hesitant, and Oliver Cowdery and Sidney Rigdon, they're flowery to the point where it's a little bit hard to read, but where Joseph Smith is very brass tacks and hammer and tongs. He's just a basic preacher. He's better to listen to. It's just easier on the ear. Teach by the Spirit. Verily I say unto you, lift up your voices unto this people. Speak the thoughts I shall put into your hearts. Okay, thinking celestial. What are you thinking about? Or are you addicted to your cell phone and that's preventing you from thinking? Speak the thoughts I shall put into your hearts, and you shall not be confounded before men. For it shall be given to you in the very hour, in the very moment, what you shall say. Take no thought beforehand. But a commandment I give unto you, that you shall declare whatsoever thing ye declare in my heart, declare in my name, in solemnity of heart, in the spirit of weakness, in all things. And I give unto you this promise, inasmuch as ye do this, the Holy Ghost shall shed forth and bearing record unto all things whatsoever you shall say. Okay, this is a teacher development. How do you teach? Of course, you need to study things out and prepare beforehand, but this says just speak in the very moment. What's the lesson plan? Do you need to have a meticulous outline? What about teachers who use a PowerPoint slideshow? Okay, what did you just read in the scriptures, and then what's the practice people doing with slideshows? What's the choice here? Doctrine and covenants, or doctrine and culture? The culture, tradition, folklore, rumor, and hearsay. Is that how you do things, or are you going to follow the scriptures? I remember a friend of mine, the stake president, asked her to speak in general conference, or in a stake conference, and she got the impression not to write her talk out. So before the conference, the stake president wanted them to write their talks out. Once again, what are you reading in the Doctrine and Covenants, and what are people doing? Is there a difference? Is there a misalignment here? So she bore false witness and said that she had written it, and then gave the talk. And son of a gun, when the Holy Ghost inspires you to disobey your stake president, that's an Abrahamic moment. But think about this. The classes come there, and they're just repeating things they heard on podcasts. Is that how Sunday school should work? So give it a think. Put it on the table there. Think about this. How we're talking. Where the Holy Ghost says, "Okay, I'll inspire you in the moment. Take no thought beforehand, and just open your mouth, and it'll be filled." Okay, we're at a half an hour. If you can tell, my voice is running out. It's a little bit late in the day, so I have to monitor my energy level. The Christ quotient, the U.S. Constitution. So, as I said, American exceptionalism and inspired Constitution are hardwired non-negotiables in the church. So beware your political party if they tell you to ignore these things. The U.S. Constitution. Now, there's globalization trend in the church. Where I served my mission in Portugal, but remember, the Constitution was for the benefit of all people, including the Portuguese, the Brazilians, the Russians, and Chinese. They need the U.S. Constitution. But in this globalized church, sometimes we tend to de-emphasize American exceptionalism. Elder Marky Peterson wrote a book called The Great Prologue. Von J. Featherstone talked about it. And, of course, Ezra Taft Benson. Now, Ezra Taft Benson was really to one side. He's like the utmost extreme of it. He wasn't normal. He did not make a distinction between his conference talks and his political speeches. And, there's some friction with him and Spencer W. Kimball. But like I said, these are hardwired non-negotiables. Political science, Thomas Paine's Common Sense talks about America having been destined for greatness, set apart. Read Federalist Number 2 by John Jay, where he talks about how blessed land with a common people, with a common language and culture, and the location. George Washington's 1789 Thanksgiving Proclamation. He expressed gratitude for the peaceable and rational manner in which we have been enabled to establish constitutions of government for our safety and happiness. Peaceable and rational manner. Now, we did have that Revolutionary War, War of 1812, but we're able to do this peacefully. It's not like, a lot of these banana republics, a new constitution every 6 months so the dictator can stay in power. Reagan's 1982, Ronald Wilson Reagan's 1982 Thanksgiving Proclamation. I've always believed that this anointed land was set apart in an uncommon way, that a divine plan placed this great continent here between the oceans to be found by people from every corner of the earth who had a special love of faith and freedom. Yeah, that's just 100% pure doctrine. Why did this bother people? One is people have a sense of egalitarianism, and it sort of bothers them. It's a bit like the science fiction story Harrison Bergeron, how you want to have egalitarianism, equality, and so you do a type of Procrustes bed. You have the everyone is special oxymoron. If everyone's special, no one's special. Another resistance factor, one is the obvious globalization. People want, they have different parties in Europe. There were elections in Portugal, and it's different parties. So you say, okay, you want everyone to be a Republican or a Democrat. Okay, how does that translate into Portuguese political parties? A third thing is the equating America with racism and slavery. Now, no one denies it. No one denies it. No one's saying it never happened. But it's not the only thing that happened. You have to read stuff that was originally written in cuneiform. Slavery did not start in America, but it certainly ended here. It was inherited in baggage, and the U.S. Constitution is an incremental elimination. It says the banning of importing of slaves until was 1808. Let me get my Constitution out here. Yeah. Oh my goodness, I may have misplaced it. No, there it is. Because I do this on the fly. Take no thought beforehand. So this is a copy of the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, published by the American Legion. Thank you, American Legion, for your service and for this Constitution. But it says here in the Constitution that it says, right here in Article 1. Am I boring you? Section 9, Article 1, Section 9. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed upon importation not exceeding $10 for each person. So what it says, in plain English, it says that after 1808, you can ban the importation of slavery. Now, it first doesn't refer to them as slaves, it refers to them as persons. The word slave doesn't appear in this. It says persons, legal personhood. Pay attention to what your eyeballs are reading, not what the crackpot is telling you and whispering sweet nothings in your ear, but what are your eyeballs telling you? Such persons, 1008. Then later on, Article 5 says, which talks about the amending process, it says, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clause of the 9th section of the first article. What this Constitution says is, after 1808, you can ban the importation of slavery, and you cannot amend this, that one clause of the Constitution. The Constitution specifically prohibited the amending of the slavery importation. Think about it. It's not a slave document. It's an incremental transition away from it. To say that America is just about racism and slavery, it's reductionistic, it's simplistic, it's factually incorrect. It's an insult to Abraham Lincoln, who is the last casualty of the Civil War, and it's an insult to Ulysses S. Grant, who won the war, and every Union soldier who died. As he died to make men holy, let's live to make men free, from the Battle Hymn of the Republic. It's an insult to say that. Reductionistic, simplistic, and untrue. Here's the atonement quotient. Well, first of all, if someone was a slave owner, does Christ's atonement cover someone who is a slave owner? Can a person be a slave over repentant? Will Jesus Christ's atonement cover that? Abrahamic trials, sacrifices, lecture of faith. The 6th lecture on faith talks about Abrahamic sacrifices, how you need to make sacrifices like Abraham. The atonement, and it talks about people are being cursed for many generations. However, as you read it, there's offers hope. It says, we'll put this generational curse upon you, but if you repent, things will be lifted. You see this with Joseph Smith's family. Emma led his children out of the church. They're slowly coming back in. It's a drip by drip, but they're coming back in. It's just anyone who leaves. It's funny because you'll see people who are pioneers and their descendants leave the church, and then they meet the missionaries. They come back into the church. The saints are being chastened, but they'll work for their good, and that's the power of the atonement. You're going to suffer stuff, but it'll work to your good. Second coming quotient, section 101, 22 through 42. Look. Keep it on the radar. Keep a long view. You have a watchtower. The temple, it's a house of glory. It's also a time machine, but it's also a watchtower. You're getting warnings about how things work in the temple. You're getting prepared. Every time you're getting endowed, when you sit in the endowment and you do the whole endowment, washings, anointings, the endowment, sealings, that's all preparing you for the second coming. The principles and the covenants you make in the temple prepare you for the second coming. You need to prepare for the second coming because it's about Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ, that's the point.